The idea is, and the way I approach deliverability, and this is my anti-spam background coming out, is that I don't care what you send. I just care that your subscriber wants that the person that you're sending mail to wants it.
Yeah.
I want them to get the mail that they want, that they need, helps them get the information that they want. That's whose side I'm on.
Yeah.
There are bad guys out there that, you talk to some of the folks from Google and they will tell you absolutely that, it was a security compromise that changed the 2016 election in the US.
My friends, today we have a very special guest joining us, Laura Atkins, an expert in the world of email deliverability and anti-spam with over 2 decades of experience. Laura has seen it all, from the early days of fighting spam in the 1990s to advising major companies and government organizations today on email strategy and compliance. She offers a unique perspective that I'm excited to explore. The viewpoint of someone fighting to keep inboxes free of unwanted messages so that people can communicate efficiently. Laura has been at the forefront of the email industry's evolution for over 20 years. She has seen technologies come and go, companies rise and fall. Her principles remain steady, that we should send communications people want to receive. So simple yet profound. I can't wait to explore her unique journey and perspective on today's email landscape. The stories she has to share are guaranteed to enlighten and intrigue. So let's jump right in. Laura, why don't we start, if you don't mind telling us where you are sitting right now? Where in the world are you?
So I am in South Dublin, Ireland. So we moved here back in 2018 and we bought an old Victorian and spent a lot of COVID dealing with contractors trying to renovate it, and finally moved in at the end of last year.
Wow, excellent. And what is your favorite thing about Ireland?
I really like the people.
Sure.
Everybody is generally friendly. Everybody is generally helpful. It feels much more of a community, and it feels much more relaxed, and it feels much more softer almost than where we were before, which was in the Bay Area. And, it was tech bro central because we were right outside Palo Alto, and it's nice not being quite so tech centric.
You know what? That actually gives us a perfect place to start, which is talking about your history in Silicon Valley before you made the wise choice to move to the Emerald Isle. Can you maybe spend a little time sharing some insights into your journey from Silicon Valley to Ireland? And can you tell us what the deal is with Turskar? Anyway, maybe start by talking about Silicon Valley and maps and, how you got into this whole email space.
Absolutely, I can do that. I think we need to actually start back a little bit before I managed to make it to Silicon Valley. I'm actually a molecular biologist by training. So when I was in high school, right after I got out of high school, I got an internship at the FDA doing fancy molecular biology research, and then kind of went through college, graduated from college, worked at the FDA for a year, then ended up in grad school up at the University of Delaware, developing respiratory vaccines for chickens. So I'm well into the respiratory vaccine thing. And then, kind of one thing really led to another. But while I was at the University of Delaware, I got my first piece of spam. So, I had an email address for 5-6 years by then. But I got my first piece of spam, and it was fairly early on. It was about 1995. Maybe 96. Early. So it was.
I don't think I got any spam in 1995.
I was outside Philadelphia, which was where Sanford Wallace was. And so there was kind of like this whole cluster of local things. And I had a udel.edu address. So it was local. And Delaware at that time didn't do usernames. They did numbers. So you could just like literally sequence through the numbers and hit everybody's email address.
Right.
So anyway, so I was in grad school at University of Delaware and got this first piece of spam, and then started with, okay, we have to stop this because like spam is annoying. And kind of as a hobby, joined some of the anti-spam groups on Usenet and some other things. Learned how to read headers. We did all of that. Meanwhile, I now left the University of Delaware and ended up in Wisconsin, the UW-Madison. Molecular biology again, but this time we were studying embryology and fetal alcohol syndrome. But again, still kind of in that whole space of fighting spam, working with folks to protect email. We didn't have email filters really back then. There was no filter. There was no spam folder. The spam folder didn't come out until like 2000 or 2001. So this was before we had any of the tools that we have. And it was all kind of on the individual to police their mailbox and report the spam and read the headers and do all of that. In the course of all of that, I met Steve, who is now my husband. And we did actually meet at an anti-spam IRC channel, and
wow,
decided that at the time he was in Boston. So he was working at, AMD? No, that wasn't his AMD. That was Hewlett Packard, or whoever they were before they were Hewlett Packard. Anyway, he was designing microchips in Boston. So I ended up getting a job at one of the hospitals associated with one of the large universities in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to, again, do molecular biology. And after we had been there for a while, and again, we were kind of all doing this anti-spam stuff on the side. Steve ran the samspade.org website and all of that kind of thing. He got offered a job in California.
Sure.
So this was early 2000. He got offered a job out in California doing architecture and design for a company, for a startup. So we got up, moved to California. And then I kind of poked around in the biotech industry a little bit, but I'd never actually finished my PhD. And so it was kind of like I didn't have quite, all of the letters after my name to get a really interesting job. And so I was kind of being picky about things because I had some really good research positions and had my own projects, even though I didn't have a PhD and all of that. And then I got offered a job at MAPS.
Sure.
And MAPS is the Male Abuse Prevention Service. They were the first commercial block list. They ran the real-time block hole list. They ran a couple of the first dial-up lists. They ran an open relay list that they kind of acquired in from various folks. And it was about, by the time, at our biggest, we were about 35 or 40 people.
Wow.
And we were all kind of united in this idea that spam was bad and spam was a problem and we should address it. And we were addressing it kind of in two different ways. So there was the block list side that was run by a bunch of folks, and they would take in nominations. At that point, you could like write up a nomination and nominate somebody to be listed on the RBL, and then they'd go through the nomination and they'd contact the company and they'd try and work with them. And if it worked, great, they didn't get listed. If the company was like, no, we're gonna keep spamming, then they would get listed.
Huh.
I was actually working on a different side of things. I was working on the customer services side. So our whole idea was that we were going to stop people from spamming before they started. So that we were going to come in and we were going to teach people how not to spam so that they didn't even get near the block list kind of thing. And I did that for about a year, and we built out a good team. We actually ended up, the first round of stuff that we did was running an abuse desk. So we were running the abuse desk for a major network services provider. Yeah. We had customers like GeoCities, we had Napster as a customer, we had eBay as a customer. So we had, we were a big network provider sitting in Palo Alto, and I was running the abuse desk. At that point, we were in early 2001. So we're at the point where the NASDAQ is crashing and the dot-bomb is happening and everybody's getting laid off. And that happened to MAPS.
Right.
And Maps decided that the customer service side wasn't really working and it wasn't a viable business model. So they were going to lay off the customer service side. So what happened then was the chairman of the board of the company that Steve was working for is Rodney Jaffe,
Oh yeah,
who
Rodney.
is big in the marketing space. And he does a lot of things with marketers and he had a lot of contacts in marketing. And so he said, I've got some friends who are having problems with the RBL. Why don't you go consult for them? And so that was basically my first consulting gig was, from Rodney. And I did that. It was a company in Georgia and they were sending lots and lots of email, lots of email at that time. And I spent 4 days down in Georgia and fixed all their problems. And we went through a whole bunch of stuff that they were doing. And thought, well, I could do this on my own. We couldn't make it work at Maps, but maybe I can do this on my own. So that was the start of the consulting side of the business.
So literally,
and where we got to.
You were literally there at the dawn of what we would, perhaps call deliverability consulting, right?
Yeah.
And what an interesting time. I just want to acknowledge what an interesting time to be in Silicon Valley. I mean, I remember going down to the Valley in 2002. I was in South San Francisco for a meeting and literally every office was empty. And the guy that I was meeting with, he got his office space for free because the landlord just needed to fill it with someone. I mean, I guess it's a little bit reminiscent of the pandemic period, the post-pandemic period, sadly, but at that time it was crazy. There was no traffic on the 101. It was absolutely a ghost town. And so many interesting things got born at that time. Obviously, one of which was your consulting.
Yeah.
So you started consulting in email deliverability, helping companies. So, where did it go from there? What were some of the next steps? Some of the things that happened early on? Like, how did it evolve?
So from that point, I was picking up some different gigs. I had colleagues that had moved on and done other things, were recommending me to various of their companies. I got a couple very early big customers, one of which was actually one of my very first customers was Exact Target.
Sure.
And we came in and they just basically, it wasn't even deliverability consulting. They just needed somebody to what we were doing is we were looking at logs. So we had a log parser and we were paying attention to what was delivering and what wasn't. And we helped them set up some of the policies for their compliance desk and how do we make sure that our customers are doing the right thing. Sure. And, it really, at that point in time, deliverability wasn't a thing. And it was, you're either listed on the RBL or your delivery is fine. This was kind of the very early spam folders. I remember I was speaking at a conference in Aspen, Colorado in 2003, I think it was, might've been 2004. But Yahoo had just released the "This is Spam" button.
Wow.
And when they just released the "This is Spam" button, one of the things they did to teach people to use it was they had a contest. So they had it, and entering the contest was reporting something as spam. And
Unreal.
The marketers at this conference, because I was up and I was on a panel with a bunch of people talking about inboxing and deliverability. Not that we called it that then, and they're like, how can Yahoo is incentivizing people to report our mail? And it's like, well, yeah, but that doesn't mean that that's actually going to affect where your mail is delivered or all of that kind of thing. And of course, this was pre-FBL. So there were no FBL. So you didn't even know who was reporting it. It was all Yahoo internal. So yeah, it was a really interesting time. And there's a huge amount of stuff that happened. And, like between about 2000 and about 2005 or 6 that have influenced what is happening today, but is really not as much. People don't realize kind of where we were back then and what tools we had and what tools we didn't have.
Right. My recollection is that the spam sort of became a problem a real problem around 2001 or 2002. Like for me, that's when I started actually seeing it in my inbox and being like, oh, this is actually a bit of an issue. And that's when the first companies really popped up to fight spam. Companies like Proofpoint, for example, emerged around that time. And I was working for a software company that almost by accident made a spam filter just as a sort of demo for a customer, and then that became their whole business, and they got acquired for that, which is how I ended up in this space. But yeah, very interesting. You mentioned there weren't even FBLs, or for people who don't know what that means, feedback loops. So feedback loops are a way that all the major providers tell senders about the spam that they're seeing, the spam reports that they're seeing from that sender's IP addresses and domains. And that's a pretty key piece of technology, because without that feedback information, senders really don't have a lot to go on in assessing whether the mail they send is wanted or not. I'm sure you'll get into this more later, but there are other things you can do. And it's interesting, sort of, I'm skipping ahead, but very recently there have been some big changes in how feedback loops work. For one thing, you're going to have to start paying for many of them if you're a big sender. Okay, cool. So carry on with the storytelling. This is fascinating.
So we really did kind of start to develop these kinds of tools, and we started to develop kind of some structure around what we were doing, because a lot of it was really ad hoc, and a lot of it was, who do you know? And it wasn't as much that, and I knew a lot of people, because when Maps kind of broke up, a lot of the folks at Maps kind of spread out. JD Falk was one of my Maps colleagues who ended up at Microsoft and Yahoo, and then eventually returned path. And he was really influential. And in fact, he predates me in the industry by a couple of years. I first met him back in the 90s on one of the anti-spam groups. But there were a lot of people at Maps who kind of then moved out into the anti-spam and the deliverability space, not quite as much. I think I was really the one who kind of ended up there. Everybody else kind of went over to work at abuse desks, or a lot of them went to the ISPs and to actually block spam on the inbound.
Or some of them went and worked at Facebook and just became rich and are retired now, in my recollection.
No, he was at AOL. He wasn't at Maps.
Oh, okay, got it. Missed some other people.
Yeah, I don't think any of the Maps folks actually ended up at Facebook.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so we all kind of knew each other, and we all kind of, a lot of the core originally really did grow out of that Usenet community and out of SpamL and some of the other private mailing lists that were invite only, and you had to be approved and all of this kind of thing. But a lot of those folks, the people that I was hanging out with kind of both socially and professionally at the time, they're now VPs, they're now, chief privacy officers, they're now founding anti-spam companies. They're really going on. And so Maps was kind of, in a lot of ways, it was influential in that it gave a lot of people a start. Now, I think in some ways, folks would have ended up in the space anyway, because they came from the tech side. So they came from, I run a mail server side. They came from, I wrote this piece of code side. Me, I would probably still be in a lab somewhere slinging DNA around. So
also, would have been a very healthy pursuit and very interesting and all that stuff, making a difference in the world, just in a different way.
Yeah.
So coming up to the present, what do you do now? Who's your typical client? I've been in this industry since I guess pretty much technically 2003, 2004, and running a service since 2012. So really exposed to deliverability issues for a little over a decade. You've got way more exposure, and I feel like there's a whole side of the industry that I just don't even understand yet, amazingly, and that's what is the life of uh, what is the life of people who have to deliver large amounts of mail that they really hope people want to receive, but it's not always the case? And how do you help them? Like, what do you do? Who are your customers?
So, more recently, a lot of my customers have been big organizations, you know, branches of government level, big social media companies, groups like that, who it's not as much about deliverability. I'm kind of not in the day to day, oh, let's look at your bounce logs, let's do this, let's do that. What I'm more doing is coming in and they're saying, okay, so we're on these three ESPs and we want to consolidate down to one.
Right.
Or we are going to buy our own IP space and we need to set that up and manage the transition across. Or, we are a large app provider that, sends 200 million emails a week, because we send, reminders every day that you need to log in and do your thing. And we're having some problems with deliverability, and we need somebody to come in and look at what's going on and how we can fix things, and what kinds of changes we need to do. So it's been as much about business consulting. What are your processes? What are your goals as a company? And I know, it's like to make money and to get bought out or to IPO or whatever, but it's more about, who are you as a company to your customers? What persona do you want to project to them? And so it's, I've also had a couple come in from the other side who want compliance work. So we're an ESP, or we're a SaaS provider and we let people send email through our systems. And how do we manage that? And how do we interact with our customers such that they're not going to do anything really bad and destroy our reputation or their reputation? But really kind of that idea of, we want to make sure that what we have in place supports the idea of reaching the inbox, rather than, okay, well, we're going to publish these 4 DNS records and we're just going to go ahead and do things. But it's a broader, more holistic view of deliverability as a business problem and a business value, rather than, we got this much mail to the inbox.
So, so if I can reflect on what you said, it seems like perhaps in the past, the reasons why companies might have come to you is because, we're getting blocked by Spamhaus, or, we've got this recurring issue where we're getting problems delivering to Yahoo. Can you please help us? But nowadays it sounds like things have evolved to a higher level, kind of a more a holistic, as you said, business problem, where you help them define, well, what are you to your customers? Are you the kind of company that is going to cold prospect people, and even if it's kind of spammy, and or what kind of how do you want to come across to the market, and then derive an email strategy based on that? Because I think some of the basics of email deliverability from a technology perspective, they seem to be table stakes now. Like, anyone can go online and, get some tips on how to have a good, clean email sending approach, how to prune your lists to make sure that you don't have really old subscribers on there, how to look at your engagement statistics to see which segments aren't performing well and clean them up. That kind of thing. I feel like that's more table stakes now, but maybe the strategy is where the problem is. That's what you're tackling.
Yeah. It was probably about a decade ago that I started looking at, okay, what the idea is, and the way I approach deliverability, and this is my anti-spam background coming out, is that I don't care what you send. I just care that your subscriber wants that the person that you're sending mail to wants it. And wants is kind of this really broad broad thing. It could be as much, yeah, okay, so I like this company and I'll get their mail, and every, 6
Yeah.
months or a year or whatever, I'll buy something.
Right.
Or, whatever it is, I don't mind that I'm on this list. I don't mind that they continually mail me.
Right.
And the idea, in fact, I was on an industry call once, and we were talking about something that the ISPs were doing, and senders were kind of cranky. And I was like, well, but okay, let's reframe this and let's go ahead and change all of this. And somebody snapped at me, whose side are you on anyway? Because I was like trying to explain, why the ISPs might be making these decisions and asking for these things. And I'm like, you know what? I'm actually on the side of the recipient. It is that end user who is in a Gmail mailbox, or who is just trying to live their life and is trying to do things and uses email as a tool. And that's whose side I'm on. I want them to get the mail that they want, that they need, that they, helps them buy things they want, helps them have experiences that they want, helps them get the information that they want. That's whose side I'm on.
Yeah. And these days, I think it must have been like at least 7 years ago that there was a talk by the lead engineers from a major mailbox provider at a conference that shall be nameless. And they were talking about how their machine learning gurus gave them this new neural network, this magic box, and it took their filtering accuracy up by a factor of 10. And how it basically worked is they threw in all of the statistics about how people were interacting with the mail they received, and it would just go into this magic box. And based on that, the magic box would say, you should filter this to the spam folder, or you should allow this to be delivered. And they didn't really know what happened inside the box. But I feel like, if it's been 7 years since that talk, things have only gotten a whole lot more powerful. And really what these neural networks are doing on the receiver end is they're acting as a proxy for the likability of your content, right? They deeply understand somehow whether what you're sending to the inbox is stuff that particular recipient really wants to receive. It can anticipate that. It can anticipate the behavior of the human, which is incredible. But you look at things like GPT-4, and it doesn't it's not surprising that that's possible these days. So yeah, if you're someone trying to deliver stuff, I like your idea of just trying to teach companies that you should send stuff that people actually want to receive. They may not be jumping up and down excited about it, but it's like, yeah, once in a while I get a mail from this company and I'm like, cool, I can buy a new kind of vacuum cleaner or whatever. I'm interested in that. And how do you do, but then how do you actually do that? How do companies make sure that they're sending stuff that their customers want or that their audience wants to receive?
So that's getting a lot harder these days. And one of the things that I've always done, particularly when I'm dealing with SBO listings, and for a long time, and I think Spamhaus still kind of suggests this, but for a long time it was, you have to do everything COI. You have to confirm all your addresses. And what I would do was, instead of, like taking the entire database and confirming the entire database, we'd split it up into addresses that we had some sort of activity, whether that be a purchase, whether that be a click, whether that be opens, kind of, sort of. There were always caveats in my opens, but
yeah.
But we know that this group of customers, that this group of recipients is somebody who is actually, a user of your brand.
Right.
And so we could put those aside and we could say, we're not going to confirm those because we have enough activity. We have enough signals that they're confirmed. And then we could look at other things, on the other end of things, where like we'd never had an open, we'd never had a click, we'd never had a successful delivery.
Right.
This was pre all of that data hygiene stuff, and like companies like never removed addresses and all of that kind of thing. And we could say, you know what, this group is completely valueless. There's like, they have never done anything. They've never logged into the account that they created. They never did any of this stuff. We're just going to throw them away. We're not even going to worry about them.
Yeah.
And then that kind of left you a pile in the middle, and then we could kind of sort a little bit finer of, okay, you know, we have, say, 150,000 or 150, 15 million or whatever addresses in this pile. And we'll confirm some of them and we'll make some assumptions about others. And we can do this. But that was kind of how I approached the spam house listings as a way, again, to keep those folks who we were pretty sure actually wanted the mail on the list without having to bother them, because COI is a bit of a pain for consumers. They've got to remember that they got to click on the link, and I'm like always getting mail and it'll pop up and I'll look at it and I go, oh, I'll do that later. And then like it gets lost in my mailbox and 2 months later, it's like, oh, right, so, wait.
For the audience, the COI, that means confirmation of interest?
Confirmed opt-in.
Confirmed opt-in.
So what that
thank
is.
Thank you. See, I didn't know that. And I should know this. I should know this.
So in Spanhouse's definition, because there are multiple definitions running around, but in Spanhouse's definition, it's you send them a message and you say, hey, do you want to stay on the list? Do you want to continue receiving mail from us? Right. And they need to click yes.
Got it. Yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of that since the introduction of the Canadian anti-spam legislation, because it mandated, anyone who sends mail to Canadians had to confirm that their recipients were opted in. And if you hadn't done that in the past, you had to now do it. So there was this period of time in which I got tons of messages, and I'm sure you did as well. Hey, do you want to keep being on this list? Because if we don't hear from you, we're going to drop you from our list. And I remember thinking, this is great. Like, I don't actually want to be on many of these lists. This is fantastic. But in other cases, it caused a moment of anxiety. So what you're saying is, for companies that want to have good deliverability these days, one of the first things that you do is basically confirm or, take a look at their recipient lists, segment out the ones that never do anything. I mean, a good fraction of those are probably spam traps anyways. And at best, they're just uninterested entirely. So what's the point? And then take the ones that are interested, that have some engagement with your list, and then do COI on many of those, if not all of them. And that's your base. That's what you're going to keep going with. Right. And that must be a tough conversation, because I'm sure a lot of organizations who might be naive to the modern world of deliverability, they don't want to let go of those email addresses. They worked hard to get them. They paid money for them. They did, $1 million ad campaigns to get those signups onto their lists, and now they've got to torch them. Like, how does that conversation go?
Well, often that conversation is a lot easier than you might think, because they're coming to me with a spam house listing. And so
got it. The fire, so the house is burning. Got it.
Right. And so it's kind of that piece of, well, you can do this or you can stay listed. And if you stay listed and you're on many of the current ESPs, you'll lose your ESP and you'll have to go to a new one. And then ESPs won't onboard you if you have a current SBL listing. So there's a lot of incentive when you can't send any mail.
Right.
When it's somebody who's coming to me, like, say, this big app or this big social media company, what we really look at instead is not necessarily doing the confirmation step, because, again, the confirmation step has problems. There are people who don't care and who are happy to receive your mail, but actually won't take the action to click. So it's more about, what do we value? What are we looking for in terms of our optimum subscriber? And what actions do we want to take? And where are our values? Do we want to keep on as big a list as possible? And fundamentally, if you're not having delivery problems, if your mail is going to the inbox, it doesn't matter, but you can kind of end up being okay. And then you slowly tick down in reputation. And then you kind of hit the threshold and your mail starts going to spam. But there are, unlike a decade or 15 years ago, there are warning signs. You'll start to see more of your mail, particularly mail to new recipients or to recipients that haven't engaged very much with your mail, that mail will start going to the spam folder. But overall, most of your recipients are still getting it in the
Sure.
inbox. And this is kind of that individualized delivery that you were talking about. And so it's like, if we don't know, if we as Google or we as Yahoo don't know what an individual will think about this mail, then we'll apply our judgment, which is based on these machine learning filters, and we'll put it in the inbox or the spam folder. If we know about you as a recipient and you've received mail from this sender before, you've received mail similar to this sender before, then we'll apply that logic on top of ours and see if if our decision for you is incorrect.
Sure.
And so there's kind of these two levels of filters. There's the filter that is the judgment of the ISP for everybody at the ISP. And those are the ones that we talk about when we talk about engagement and when we talk about complaints and when we talk about, everything we do is that filter. Those individual filters, we almost can't affect. There's not anything we can do.
Huh. Interesting. So yeah, I mean, like getting into a conversation about reputation, for a long time, there's been this notion of IP reputation. Email is still broadly sent out of IPv4 addresses. Yes, there's IPv6, but nobody really talks about it. It's like, I think 10 years ago, it was an interesting thing to build into your MTA platform. And there was a wave of implementations, and then now it's kind of there, but it's IPv4. So there's like 4 billion IP addresses. Each IP, has a sort of rating of some sort. It's either on a block list or it's not. And it used to be that was the main thing people worried about. Am I sending out a clean IPs? People would pay a lot of money to be on IPs that are clean, are brand new, that had never sent anything before. I remember when we bought we bought a /20 for mail channels, and I sent the block to Spamhaus ahead of time, and I asked them, have you ever seen this before? And they said, no, that one's completely new. And so then I was like, okay, cool, I'll buy this one. Because I had been warned by friends that when you buy IP addresses, you got to check their history, because even if they were involved in a major spamming operation 5 years before, they're going to have problems. Anyways, what's your impression of what reputation is now? Like, is it still important? How has that all changed?
Oh, the reputation discussion. So yeah, and just for a little history for folks who may not know, the reason IP reputation was the top of the pops, and this is what we do, is because IP reputation was very difficult to forge. Because the IP address that was connecting to you was the one piece of information that you could trust was true, because it was actually from your own machines. Now, there are ways to fake IPs, and they are still being done to this day. And this was not 100%, but
stuff, yeah.
There was asymmetric routing where you sent your traffic out through like big pipes, and then like you had an AOL dial-up to get the return packets.
Unreal.
It was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. And that's why IP reputation was a thing, because that was the one piece of data that we could trust. Now, again, in the 2000s, we started looking at things like, okay, how can we make other bits of data more robust? And how can we make sure that we can trust other bits of data? So we came up with SPF, and we came up with DKIM. And there were a bunch of other things that we tried, and there were a bunch of other things that we talked about that never quite made it into the wider deployment, and were never quite codified or implemented. But what that gave us was a more of a way to start trusting the domain name. So we could start trusting that a message that was signed with DKIM, that whatever domain was in that D equals in the DKIM signature was the domain that was taking responsibility for that mail. And then we could hang reputation off of that.
Right.
SPF is a little squishier, but again,
it definitely
the idea
is.
was there.
It definitely is. I could tell stories. from recent history. I don't know if you've heard, but yeah, SPF is a challenge. SPF is a challenge, but DKIM is kind of like pretty strong cryptographically. The DNS itself is very, I'm not going to say perfect, but it's pretty bulletproof now with DNSSEC. The infrastructure is pretty good. So you're saying, you know, domain reputation has become quite important. IP reputation is still a thing, but domain reputation is very important.
Yeah, I treat IP reputation as you must be this tall to ride this ride, you know, but it doesn't matter how
If
much
you're
taller
taller.
than,
Right.
you know, you're just this tall. And so kind
Yeah.
of there's this baseline of you have to have, you know, a decent enough reputation. And these days that includes things like you have to have reverse DNS set up correctly,
Right.
and you have
Sure.
to, you know, not be in a block of bad IPs. So, you know, there are other things to do with IP reputation, but in general, if, you know, you have a minimum IP reputation, then your mail is accepted. And once your mail is accepted, IP reputation is basically not an issue.
Yeah.
And I've been saying this for a really long time, that once your message gets into the spam filter rather than the MTA, which is the machine receiving the mail, that once the mail has been accepted by the receiving system, IP doesn't matter.
Right.
And that's when the domain reputation comes in. And the domain reputation, any domain that's in your message, anywhere in the message, has a reputation. So anything in your links, anything in your images, anything in your headers, you know, and there's kind of like, we can really trust this or we're not sure about this. So there's strength to the reputation. So that domain that's in your DKIM signature, that's a really strong reputation.
Right.
And if that domain in your DKIM signature is in the same domain space as, you know, the links in your message, then that reputation is really strong.
Right.
But if it's not, you know, the reputation of the links in the message is also important, you know, and the domains and the links, that's really important too. And certainly we've seen over the years that there's certain domains that end up in messages that are bad enough that they can just tank your delivery.
Wow. So for example, if you were using, you know, if the links in your messages were pointing at some, you know, some service that had lots of people using it, and they were using those links in their messages, and the reputation of those messages was poor, that would kind of transfer over to those domains. So I mean, to give a silly example, if your email contains URL shortener links, like that might not be the best idea, because we know that spammers use URL shortening services all the time, and so it's likely that those domains are bad. So if you're, you know, pro tip, if you're sending out mail for your major corporation, you might want to have your links come from your domain, or at least a domain that you very carefully control and you're pretty sure is not used in spamming campaigns.
Yep.
Yeah. Huh.
Pro tip.
Pro tip. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because one of the things that I think we all know now is that the major email receivers, when they process a message, assuming it's gotten through the IP reputation filters and they've actually got the message, you know, one of the really important features is the domains. So I'm imagining that there's all these things about domains that get thrown into the neural network, like the age, you know, how often is this domain visited? You know, how many other messages is this domain used in? Do people engage with those messages? All these things go into the bag, and then a judgment is made, and the domains are really a big part of that judgment.
Yeah, domains are really I think the key to deliverability these days. You know, if you're sending through a moderately reasonable service, your domain is going to trump everything.
Interesting. Right. So if you're sending through a poor service, then we can't help you. Is that the idea?
Well, I mean, you know, the first kind of thing is, and in fact, I've got a client right now who I'm working through, and their ESP, their compliance desk isn't the greatest. And so this ESP, their shared IPs are going on and off of Spam Cop fairly regularly.
Right.
And it's a B2B thing, and Spam Cop is actually used by Mimecast, which handles a lot of B2B mail and hosts a lot of domains. So we're seeing, a lot of delivery problems based on these Spam Cop listings, but they're shared IPs. It's not my, it might be my client, but I don't know that. So the idea that we have to kind of be aware of what we're doing and who we're doing business with. Now, there's contracts involved, and it's not something that we can simply move them off. There are business considerations to making these kinds of big changes. And moving ESPs is like, I hate moving a client off an ESP because we got to start, from warm up, and it's a lot of work. It's a huge amount of work. Moving all of your campaigns and moving all of your logic and moving all of your reputation and all of this stuff. It's a huge undertaking. So I don't like to recommend that. But by the same token, there's this piece of, well, this ESP is not really taking care of business. And they're just letting customers do stuff that's getting them listed on Spam Cop. And yeah, they get delisted after 24 hours, but then 3 days later, they're listed again,
Yeah, and that kind of leaves a stain.
Yeah. So,
talking about ESPs, I like, you would think I would know what ESPs do, right? We technically are an ESP, kind of. We relay mail for web hosting providers. Really, we're like an anti-spam service that also delivers mail. We don't have, big enterprise clients sending to lists directly working with us, but, millions of hosting users, each sending to tiny lists of their own with absolutely no control over anything and no idea what they're doing, because these are tiny SMBs. They send through our service. But does the perfect ESP exist today? If you were starting from scratch, what would the ideal ESP look like? Like, could you?
I've always said I don't want to run an ESP because
no, I know that, and but if you did have, if you got $2 billion instead of that money going to generative AI, and you got to create Laura's ESP, what would be the characteristics of that ESP? What would be like, wow, everybody's got to use this service because they've got it dialed from day one?
See, I'm not sure something like that exists. It's not. There are different ESPs that focus on different things. So you get your MailChimps and your Constant Contacts that focus on kind of the smaller folks who are sending to 500, 600, 800, addresses. And they don't want to get bigger. They're a small company and they're happy with their volume and all of that. And that kind of sender has a vastly different need set than, say, my big, social networking company who is sending 250 million emails a day. And what they're doing more is, they need somebody who has hefty iron under the covers that can send the mail out. They need really strong reporting. They need, good bounce handling and good feedback and all of that kind of thing. So that, the experts inside the company can have the data that they need to drive the company. So, and there's certainly multiple ESPs in that space, that have the big iron and that have the big pipes and that have the really focused groups and who are sending, 1 billion emails a day, across their entire customer base. And I think that, the MTA and the deliverability style features, the ability to track opens, the ability to track clicks, the ability to sign with independent DKIM keys and be able to multiple sign messages,
Right. To
all of
oversign.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
If you can't do that, you shouldn't be an ESP. Like
Right.
that, this is
That's the
like,
table stakes now.
yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other stuff that on top of that improves usability. So do you have an API? Do you let people bring their own IP space that you can route for them? Because there's a lot of groups out there that you can buy a /20 or a /24 and you can take it to X and they'll route it for you. And so all those, you're using their infrastructure, but it's your IPs.
Right.
And you can take those IPs with you when you move.
Right.
But so I don't think there's one, and I actually think that the diversity in the marketplace is really good. I think it is better that we have folks who are focusing on specific needs and focusing both on the, for the sender side, but also, how do we interact with the recipients? What kind of experience do they have when they want to come unsubscribe from something and we manage the unsubscribe page? So I don't think there's one answer to that.
Right. Got it. So yeah, so there's a healthy mix of ESPs in the market already, is what you're saying basically, and they each serve different segments. And if you want, tons of data so that you can have your own internal machine learning people crunch through it and figure out what lists should be doing what, you can have that. And if you just want to send a mailing list to your knitting group, you can do that too. And I guess the problems faced by a company like MailChimp are going to be way different than the problems faced by an ESP that's servicing Fortune 500 companies. They're not necessarily, the ESP servicing the Fortune 500 isn't going to be so worried about abuse, because while they're definitely trying to make sure that the Fortune 500 doesn't do really stupid stuff, they're probably less worried about, a fake login and someone doing a drive-by campaign. Is that true? Or do those big iron ESPs also worry about abuse?
But they should.
They should. Okay, sure.
There certainly have been a lot of, there was a ongoing set of attacks. It's been in the last 5 years, because the last time I heard about it, it was actually here in Dublin. But that there was a significant attempt to compromise employee credentials at a couple ESPs.
Wow.
Some of them made the news, and I'm not going to name them because it's fundamentally, you can look it up. But and what it ended up being was and their names you would recognize. Mm-hmm. But what I heard through the grapevine was that there was a lot of work being done on the social engineering side. It was people were looking up Facebook friends and family and sending texts to the employees pretending to be family members.
Wow.
And friends to compromise their credentials. And it worked, it did work in a couple of cases. And I think, it's kind of interesting because the ones I remember more recently, it was always they got in and they stole people's crypto lists.
Right.
So it was all crypto coins and cryptocurrency. But it's not the first time,
right,
that these companies have been compromised. And in fact, there was a big compromise, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago, maybe. And I ended up having to call Return Path
right
on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving and go, guys, I hate to tell you this, but your database has been compromised.
And
I still get, every once in a while, I will see Tom and he'll just look at me and he goes, you really ruined my Thanksgiving.
Oh, that sucks. And I know how important Thanksgiving is to people in the States. I'm in Canada. We have Thanksgiving earlier, and it's just, it's not that big of a deal. You have a turkey dinner with your family, that's it. But in the States, it's like everybody flies home. Everybody takes a couple, 2-3 days off, and it's hardcore. It's almost bigger than Christmas, to be honest.
Yeah.
So to have your Thanksgiving disrupted because of a database breach that's problematic. I can see. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we got a taste of how, not a breach, but in our case, someone discovered what they perceived to be an exploit, where they could send mail through somebody who used us, and because of SPF, that would allow them to impersonate domains that were sending mail in other parts of our infrastructure. And being a unique kind of ESP that sends mail for the hosting industry, we can't force verification of every single domain because there's too many of them. But we send mail for more domains than any other transactional provider. There's literally millions of them, and they're popping up and down all the time. So they thought that this was a really cool exploit, and they talked about it at DEF CON. And it was hard work dealing with that. I learned a lot about PR. I made a lot of mistakes. I'll be the first to admit I made myself look really bad, and I'll never do that again. But it just goes to show, when you are working in an adversarial world, one slip up can be really painful.
Sure.
And ESPs are like, they've got a treasure chest of IP reputation that they are guarding for their customers. And if that gets disrupted, it is very painful. It can ruin your Thanksgiving,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something that a lot of marketers don't quite understand, is just how adversarial and how scary the security is around email.
Yeah.
I mean, email is the root of all, I won't say all, but the vast majority of the major compromises that have happened over the last 20 years have all started with email.
Yeah.
And that is why the filters do what the filters do. And I get this question occasionally. It's, what will happen if spam goes away tomorrow? Well, if spam goes away tomorrow, it doesn't matter. The filters are still going to be there.
Yeah.
Because we've built them up and they're useful to people, because a lot of people get a lot of mail and find things like tabs or sorting or any of this stuff. The filters will still be there. But there's still this idea of email is dangerous. And there are bad guys out there that, I mean, you talk to some of the folks from Google and they will tell you absolutely that, it was a security compromise that changed the 2016 election in the US.
Right.
Right. And there's a whole lot of companies who are going to want those appliances and are going to want those filters in front of their mail, even if there's no spam.
Right. Yeah. This brings me to a topic I wanted to talk to you about, which is AI, generative AI specifically. I must say, when OpenAI released GPT-4 in March, my immediate thought was, oh God, this is going to be used by the bad guys to create very human-like, lifelike conversations with victims over email and SMS. And we're not going to have to wait very long until we start seeing this in the real world, in our email boxes. And I have to say, I didn't see it for a while. I didn't see anything that was like obviously GPT generated, but now I do every day. And a very recent thing was, okay, you know it's GPT when the email starts with, "I hope this email finds you well." That seems to be its play. It opens every email with, "I hope this email finds you well." And what it was trying to get me to do was to, really pay attention, because they had found some security breach that they wanted to talk to me about. And it was, from some brand, purportedly. In reality, it was from a Gmail account. And I knew that it was a phishing attack. But by using generative AI, they were able to make that communication highly personalized. So they had some information about me that they must have drawn from LinkedIn or another public source. They knew what my role was, and the email was perfectly crafted around that. I'm pretty sure a human didn't write it. AI wrote it. And you've got to think, if this is happening millions of times a day, and these models are only getting more powerful, that's going to just make the anti-abuse job so much more difficult, because the spam filters, it's not a template, it's an approach. How do you filter that stuff, right? And they're coming from Gmail accounts.
I'm gonna argue that that's not generative AI writing those emails, because I've been getting them for much longer than before March. I've been getting them for years and years, and they always do. I hope this email starts off finding you well.
Yeah.
And it's always very clear to me, that they've done things like, scraped my website. So they've pulled an old blog post off, or, they've found something on my LinkedIn or whatever. But this is all just, it's basically like WordPerfect macros rather than, I think, GPT. And this is something that we've been dealing with for a long time.
Interesting.
Now, what is actually happening, and where the threat model is, if we go down the threat model end of things, where the threat model is these days, what happens is that you'll get somebody approaching you on Facebook or on Facebook Messenger or in email, and eventually they'll try and move you over to WhatsApp,
right,
or
I've
Signal.
had that. Yes, absolutely,
because that is where everything's encrypted, and it cannot be gotten into by either Facebook or the Signal folks. And that's why they're doing it, is so that it's easier for them.
They can get you into a dark alley, basically, and then they can mug you.
Basically, yeah. Where the cameras can't see you, and where the intercepts can't happen. So I think, but I also think that some of that it could be being generated because somebody has found their stash of 50,000 templates that they use and fed it into the generative AI.
Right.
And so, but there are tools that will personalize messages based on LinkedIn profiles.
Yeah.
And they've been around for a while. I think that's always been a challenge, because spear phishing has always been an issue. And you get the messages impersonating the CEO telling the accountant to make a wire transfer, or you get these other kinds of things. That's always been an issue. But I think that's one of the reasons that mail into businesses is a little more complicated than mail into like Gmail or Yahoo, because they have many more layers, and it's not just this single, is it spam, is it not spam? Is this dangerous? Is this impersonating somebody?
Right. What are they intending?
There's all of these kinds of things.
Yeah. Fascinating. I mean, I like not talking about phishing or security, going over to the marketing side. We're certainly seeing a lot more cold prospecting type activities, where either people are coming to us and asking if they could use our service to send out cold prospecting. To verified lists only, but it's cold, meaning like it's spam, right? And we turn them all down, obviously. But many of them are talking about how they use AI to generate the cold prospecting messages, and they can even automate the handling of replies from the prospect. So they'll take a list, they have a sort of overall intention, and they'll go back and forth with the target until it sort of makes sense to forward it to a real human. And I just wonder if that's what's going on kind of in the dark corners of the internet already. Like, are big companies starting to engage with generative AI to run email campaigns? Are you seeing that in your practice, where they're saying, hey, we want to use AI to automate the generation of content, or even the handling of whole conversations? How do we do that in the email world and not get blocked? Right? Like, is that happening yet?
So, I mean, it might be happening. I'm not a fan of of any of these. I am not on the AI bandwagon. Let's just put it that way. And so then you probably need to find a different consultant because I don't
if
have any
that's what you want to do.
there.
Yeah. Yeah. And why would you say that? Like, why are you not on the bandwagon? Not that it's the right bandwagon, but.
Well, because it's inherently, I mean, how the large language models have been generated has been by stealing content from people.
That's it.
My website is in multiple large language models because they scraped all of my content.
Totally. It knew. I asked GPT, do you know Laura Atkins of Word to the Wise? And it was like, yes, I absolutely. What do you want to know about her? And I said, well, generate some questions for an interview. And it happily did so. And I'm not going to lie, that's how I generated the list of initial questions. And then I, iterated on it. But yeah, they know about you.
And I have friends that are, authors and like authors of movies one would know of and books that have been on the New York Times bestselling list. And their content has been pirated and put in these large language models. And so the models themselves are built on theft. And they're built on stealing intellectual property. And from my perspective, what a large language model is, and okay, so I came from the squishy biology end of science, but I did have some statistics and I do have some, familiarity with the space. It's basically autocorrect gone global.
Right.
What a large language model and these generative AI engines tell you is if you have this word or if you have these 7 words, then they tend to be in this order. Or if you ask about this topic, these are words I have seen about this topic.
Yeah.
And I think part of and it makes shit up.
Absolutely.
There's a couple people who, there've been a few that have made the press, but somebody tried to write a legal brief and it made up fake cases for this guy's legal brief.
Right.
And it's done the same with science. People have asked it science questions and it has made up peer-reviewed published articles with real people's names in there. And so now these scientists are getting requests for this article that they wrote that they never wrote because GPT. And so there's a lot of reasons I don't like it. And I don't think it is as I think people want it to be transformative because they want to be on the beginning of the next great bandwagon. But it's not AI. It is statistical predictions. And so I don't, and I'm just not, I don't think it's going to make that big a difference. All it's going to do is increase the amount of garbage in the world. And garbage writing in the world. And one of the problems that we're starting to see is actually that the AI makes stuff up and it puts together some of these nonsensical things. And then somebody publishes it somewhere. And then the AI takes in that content that it has made that is incorrect. And so now we're getting that it's iterating on its own garbage.
Yeah, right. Of course, that's a problem. I actually think there's a few perspectives on that. One perspective that I've heard, and I think from people at OpenAI, okay, maybe not surprisingly, is that they actually don't see that as a problem because the AI-generated content that is published to the web is being curated by humans who are saying, oh, this stuff's good enough to be published. And so there's sort of like, yes, it's getting more training data that's regurgitated from its own language model, but the humans are selecting the stuff that gets put up largely. And so they feel like it's going to improve the quality of the model instead of making it worse. I guess the other thing is they've frozen a snapshot of what the web looked like before it was all polluted. And so they can compare the before and after. And even though they might not know what new stuff is AI generated, at least they know that up until March of 2023, the web was largely human authored. And so we can rely on that for the basis of our model. Anyway,
That's so adorably naive.
Isn't it? Yeah. But this adorably naive stuff is backed with, tens of billions of capital. And another interesting side of generative AI is the generation of images. And that's hugely controversial with artists who are now finding ways that they can either block their art from the AI models, or they're even creating adversarial art to ruin these models. So they're like generating work that they say is theirs, but it's garbage in order to taint the model. And so, people will be less incentivized to generate images in the style of whatever artist. I mean, if you go into many of these tools, these art generation tools, you can kind of have it generate just some sort of random stuff. You can give it a picture and you can say like, well, just make this into art, right? And it'll generate a few different ideas for you. And each one will have an in the style of artist name. And so they're literally not even trying to hide the fact that they are copying the style of artists, and those people aren't getting paid. That's always really, bothered me. So yeah, I kind of get where you're coming from, but it's with us, right? This stuff is now with us. And I had just wondered, is generative AI something that people in the email sending side are starting to use in a serious way to send out, to generate campaign content, for example, personalized campaign content? I hypothesize that if you could get a language model to write very personalized content to each user, then you might have better engagement if it's not just a template that's the same for everyone. But from what you're saying so far, it sounds like that kind of thing has been going on already for a long time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, what the large language models do is it's nothing more than, hiring a group of English speakers in the Philippines or
Right.
in the Far East to generate individual emails based on, and that's been the boiler rooms, and they're paying
That's been a thing.
pennies
Yeah.
to have people write this. And, so I just, and I know there's a lot of marketers that are thrilled and think it's great and think that this is, candy and it's going to change everything. I think that there are societal and ethical questions that, are important to me, and are things that I think should be dealt with. And, a lot of these big companies that have these large language models have fired their AI ethics teams.
Yeah. Right. I've heard
And
about that.
Yeah. And it's like, this does not strike me as a good pathway to be going down.
I wonder if it's going to end up being a little bit like Airbnb, where, wow, great startup idea, made tons of money. And initially it's so cool. We're all traveling around. I remember circa 2011, 2012, going to Berlin and staying in someone's apartment and thinking, this is so great. Wow, it's like I'm a real Berliner, And now cities are chucking out Airbnb entirely. They're banning it, like New York, right? Where I live, the province has essentially banned it in the entire province, because we found this tiny problem with Airbnb, that it completely eliminates rental housing for actual people who need to live there. And so communities are getting cleared out and people are homeless. With AI, I think it's kind of similar. It's very glitzy. It's very exciting in this early phase, but the real impact of it, we're not going to feel for a while. And when we do feel it, people are going to get really mad, and they're going to create policies that make it a little bit harder to do this stuff.
I mean, this was a clear end game for me. I mean, the Airbnb thing, that how did you not think that was going to happen?
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's where, the ethics teams and kind of the broader societal questions and the things that we need to address and wrestle with are actually important, and we ignore a lot of them all the time. Um, and you know, I say this again as somebody who, you know, was trained as a scientist and avoided every bit of humanities that they didn't force me to take when I was getting my degree.
Me too.
But you know, it's those humanities questions where you kind of have to wrestle with stuff that's not black and white, and you kind of have to weigh the differences and weigh the pros and the cons and who benefits and who is harmed. And so where does this move and where does this go? How do we make that better? And how do we fix that? And how do we even ask and talk about these hard questions? And I think you know, the AI discussion is just one of the places where, you know, we asked it. I also think it's suspicious that, well, it's not suspicious. It's very clear what's going on. That as crypto started to as cryptocurrency started to die,
Right.
AI came in, and so
Yep.
you know it's all the same people trying to use all of the hardware that they were using to mine Bitcoin and all of that are now in the, oh, and let's do AI and let's, you know, so there's a huge profit motive there. And I am certainly not a person that is in the, if it makes money, it's good.
Mm,
A lot of people make money doing very bad things.
mm,
A lot of people make a lot of money doing very bad things. And so I don't think money is a good answer to, but this harms people.
mm.
You know, this is harming people. This is, you know, causing problems. These are the problems. It's going to cause problems down the line. And, you know, the answer I get back is, well, but I can make billions of dollars.
Yeah,
And it's like,
or like it's inevitable. Yeah, but you know, come on, stop being such a Luddite. This is inevitable. It's going to happen. You know, get with the program kind of thing.
yeah, but they told me that, you know, fiat money was going away and everybody
Right.
would be using Bitcoin, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
a decade ago. So it's like, yeah, well, no,
I
actually, that's not how
yeah,
it
I
works.
feel like I'm one of those people who's inexorably attracted to the latest and greatest thing. And back when in early 2011, a friend of mine who is really well connected in the security space, he said over coffee one day, "Hey, have you heard about Bitcoin? You got to look into Bitcoin. It's fascinating." And I went to Hong Kong for 2 weeks on a business trip, and I sat in a cafe, and I just did nothing but read about Bitcoin, you know, and it was so engaging, so fascinating what was going on. And but over the ensuing sort of 12 to 18 months, as I got more engaged with that world, what I found was that there were definitely some cool people working in that world. There were a few people who were like, these are my people. They seem to be ethical. They're doing it for the engineering, you know. But the vast majority of people were like weird hucksters, and it just had this scammy feel to it, this get rich quick scammy feel to it, and that just got worse and worse over time. And I'm really glad that phase has kind of broken, and now, you know, it's still there bubbling away, but governments have finally caught up, and they're saying, you know what, that behavior was outright illegal, and we're going to now prosecute these people. And so I feel like it's sort of like now it's a contained issue. But AI, AI is not yet there. It's still in that early phase where everybody's looking at it, everybody's fascinated, tinkering with it, and we ain't seen nothing yet. Like it's gonna get seriously scary before a serious amount of investment goes into the other side of the adversarial game with AI. Just like we saw in the anti-abuse space. I think people who work in our industry really understand this, you know, adversarial technology. You see it coming and you're like, that's going to be a problem. Everybody else is like, no, it's not. This is great. This is fantastic. You know, you won't need a bank account. Everybody can be like self-sufficient, you know, and you're like, no, this is really going to be a problem. Like they're going to be funding terrorism soon. Just watch. And sure, it happened. You know, same with AI.
Well, and you know, and in some ways, it's kind of it's kind of like the whole spam thing. I mean, you know, we were telling people back in 96 and 97 that spam was going to be a problem.
Yeah.
And this was going to cause real issues. And they're like, it's 4 messages, just hit delete. And yeah, it was.
Yeah.
You know, and a big spam run those days was a couple 100,000 messages. Well, of course, you know, this was like pre-2000, so the internet was a whole lot smaller.
Yeah.
But by the same token, you know, and these are questions that we kind of don't have answers to. And these are issues that I think people should think more about. But AI is going to do you know, marketers are going to do what marketers are going to do.
They are.
And I've never found a place where marketers think they've gone too far. They always think they haven't gone far enough.
Right. Yeah, well,
And
I
I
guess,
think,
yeah, I can see that. But if you're a marketer, your job at a company is to make certain numbers happen. You got to have leads coming in. The salespeople have to be busy. That's your whole metric that you're measured by, right? And so you haven't gone far enough because you're always going to have higher expectations from one quarter to the next. That doesn't surprise me. And to the extent that people build AI tools, whether they work really well or not, people are going to try them.
yeah, I will say that here I don't. Every time I've like looked into creating an account and playing with them, they've started asking me for personal information that I'm not giving to an AI generator. So I've actually not played with them because no, you don't get my phone number. No, you don't get my
Very
home address.
interesting.
No, you don't get all this data about me.
Huh.
And I don't know if everybody else is just like, oh, I don't care, they can have that data or what. But you know, or if it's just something about the legislation on this side of the Atlantic.
Right. Yeah. It kind of makes you think differently, doesn't it? Well, listen, Laura, we've spent a long time talking together. I could talk to you for another 2 hours, and maybe we should do another session at some point. But I think we should wrap it up.
Okay.
I thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and I look forward to speaking with you again.
All right. It's been wonderful. It's been great. And I'm happy to come back.
Awesome. We'll do that.